Hello everyone. As I'm sure you're all aware of the current conflict in very heavy quotation marks, between Israel and Palestine that's been waging on for a couple of months now, ramping up significantly since the October 7th attacks. Though my platform is small, I still see the value in me speaking out against the Israeli settler colony, and so today I come to you with debunking every pro-Israel / Zionist argument ever. Obviously, I'm just one person and I've probably missed some arguments, but I've compiled some of the most common ones that I found through debates and social media, and written a full response to each. I've also tried to structure the arguments in a way that seems to logically progress, as if this whole video is a Socratic dialogue between me and the other person I made up to argue on the side of Israel. But I must state some ground rules first. Any anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, or pro-genocide or general bigotry in the comments will not be tolerated. I don't usually moderate my comments, but I will delete that shit as soon as I see it. This video is made for actual political discourse, not to spread hate. I refer to Palestinian land as Israel throughout the video. I do believe that the land is rightfully Palestinian. However, just so people know, when I talk about Israel, I mean the state or the geographical region it currently occupies. This video has been checked over by both Jewish and Palestinian people to ensure that I'm not unknowingly spreading any form of hate, and to check that all criticism is fair and just. All of the sources will be listed in chronological order in the Google Doc in the description. The sources will also have a number, which you'll see when I talk about them. It'll be in the bottom left corner. So without further hesitation, let's get into the video. Being anti-Israel is anti-Semitic. Before I state anything in this argument, I would like to disclose something that's been annoying me. I've seen people, mostly on TikTok, use the etymology of the word Semitic to prove that being anti-Semitic refers to anybody from a Semitic region or speaking a Semitic language, because by definition it's included in anti-Semitism. I just wanted to point out how unbelievably dumb and frankly quite disgusting this argument is. Everybody knows what anti-Semitism is. Historically, it's always related to the persecution of the Jewish people, and I don't think now is the time to start tracing the lineage of words to prove your point. Words change and adapt as they're used, taking on new meanings and leaving old meanings behind. This is not a new thing, nor is it utilized by Jews to try and erase the oppression of Arabic or other Semitic people. Not only is this argument subliminally erasing thousands of years of anti-Semitic behavior, but it's also just like a weak argument, and it's obviously more focused on political point scoring or totally destroying your opponents than it is actually trying to bring people over to the side of the Palestinians. Anyways, to the actual debunking. Being anti-Israel is the opposition to the state of Israel. To oppose the chauvinistic expansion of the state of Israel, to oppose the indiscriminate bombings and withholding of necessary aid to the Palestinian people, to conflate the horrific actions of Israel to Judaism itself is anti-Semitic. Taken from the word of God upon speaking to Moses, the Torah states, Exodus 10:13, "Thou shalt not murder." As reported by the Minister for Health in Gaza, 17,000 and counting have been killed by Israeli bombing and blocking of aid. Thou shalt not steal. Since the 1948 purchase, estimated by Amnesty International, over 100,000 hectares of Palestinian land have been appropriated by Israel. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Since the October 7th attacks, Israel and its Prime Minister Netanyahu have made multiple unsubstantiated claims over beheaded babies, the location of Hamas bases being a hospital. Israel lied about the Qana massacre, they lied about their aims during the Suez crisis, and they continue to lie to the Western media. This is all Jewish scripture, the words all practicing Jews live by. Now I ask you, where is this philosophy in the actions of the Israeli government? Where is Israel following the words of Moses and Joshua? How could you even think about conflating Judaism, a religion of peace, of loving, with its expansive history throughout time, persisting and surviving throughout so many attacks and oppression? How could you even think in any way that this is connected to this genocidal imperialist regime? The party currently in power, Likud, were established as a secular or non-religious party. In 2013, Likud established a coalition government which saw the first ever non-religious government in Israeli history. As I said before, to conflate Judaism with the actions of the Israeli government is uneducated at best and anti-Semitic at worst. Either way, it's a cheap defense for supporters of Israel to cower behind. And if you don't want to take it from me, I highly recommend you listen to Rabbi Yisrael David Weiss speak on this topic. Israelis are indigenous to the land. Yeah, the original Israelis are indigenous to Palestine. However, modern-day Israelis are not. There's a clip from a Jubilee video that helps illustrate this point, though I think most of their videos are not beneficial whatsoever.
100%. Palestine used to meant...
I can ask you one question?
Yes.
Please answer it. Your grandfather, you know where he is?
Yes.
Where he is?
To give me how many graves you want me to count?
7 before.
7 before, I know, yes.
Where?
7 before is in Hungary.
In Hungary. 9 before, he's in Palestine. Don't tell me it's not your land.
I'm saying it's not your land.
The Israelis living in Israel today are not indigenous. Sure, their ancestors may have been, but since the diaspora and the Jewish settlement around the world, they cannot be considered indigenous. Let's use the UN definition of indigeneity to examine how indigenous modern-day Israelis are. 1. Self-identification as indigenous people. This is really up to the individual, but sure, I'll allow it. 2. Historical continuity with pre-colonial or pre-settler societies. No, as I've just mentioned, the vast majority of Israelis migrated here following World War II, so they have no consistent and unbroken link to Palestine. 3. Strong link to territories and surrounding natural resources. Again, no. The territories have been disputed since the rise of Zionism and the beginning of Israeli colonialism. The rest of the Arab world is also disconnected from Israel. You can look to the myriad of wars fought between the two as evidence of that. 4. A distinct social, economic, or political system. No. Politically, Israel uses a parliamentary democracy, which is used by 79 other countries. Economically, Israel is a free market capitalist economy, which is used by nearly every country on earth. Socially is the only arguable distinct system, being the only Jewish state. But to make said argument, you'd need to ignore the millions of Jewish communities around the world and individual practicing Jews outside of Israel. 5. Distinct language, culture, and beliefs. It's like the same argument as the social part of the last point. 6. They form non-dominant groups of society. Definitely not. Israelis are the dominant group in Israeli society. 7. Resolve to maintain and produce their ancestral environments and systems as distinctive peoples and communities. No, Israel is not focused on returning to the first century society, the last time that Jews were the majority population of Palestine. So out of a 7, modern-day Israelis score between a 1 and a 2.3 depending on how you view points 4 and 5. Israelis left the region and before 1960 had not had a majority population of Palestine since the 1st century. So yes, historically, Israelites were indigenous to Palestine, but since that, modern-day Israelis are not, instead migrants from mostly Europe. This does not justify the displacement of Palestinian people, nor does it justify the colonial project that is modern-day Israel. The Torah says that Israel is owned by the Jews. Throughout the Torah, it is stated that the descendants of Abraham have a claim to Israel. Abraham is thought of the first Jew, so his descendants are all Jews, since Judaism is ethno-religious. Firstly, the obvious thing to point out is that this claim does not hold up in any way, shape, or form to anyone that isn't following an Abrahamic religion. But we might as well analyze this claim, because who doesn't love reading religious texts on their Christmas break? I will now read from Leviticus 18, 1-5. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You must not do as they do in Egypt, where you used to live, and you must not do as they do in the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you. Do not follow their practices. You must obey my laws and be careful to follow my decrees. I am the Lord your God." So here we see God speak to Moses and tell him, when you get to Canaan, you must follow my rules. Canaan, if you don't know, is a regional civilization consisting of the Phoenicians, the Philistines, and, as I said, the Israelites. As I've previously stated, modern-day Israel is not adhering to the rules laid out by God, and so should be vomited out of the land as described in Leviticus 18:28. And before anyone says, this entire verse is only talking about unlawful sexual relations, not about anything else God said, Leviticus 19, the actual next page, restates all of God's demands and tells Moses that to keep the land, he and his people must follow God's rules. And look at this fun one I found. Leviticus 19:18. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. So much for the Palestine deserved it crowd. Leviticus 25:23 directly says, the land, Israel, must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine, God's, and you reside in my land as foreigners and strangers. Confirmation directly from God himself, saying that the land is not yours, which nicely leads on to my next point. Again, I'm going to read from the Torah, specifically Deuteronomy 30:1-6. This is a long one, but it's worth listening to. When all these blessings and curses I've set before you come on to you, and you take them to heart, wherever the Lord your God disperses you among the nations, and when you and your children return, the Lord your God, and obey him, with all your heart and with all your soul, according to everything I command you today, then the Lord God will restore your fortunes and have compassion on you and gather you again from all your nations where he has scattered you, even if you have been banished from the most distant lands under the heavens. From there the Lord your God will gather you and bring you back. He will bring you the land that belonged to your ancestors, and you will take possession of it. He will make you more prosperous and numerous than your ancestors. The Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants, so that you may love him with all your heart and all your soul. The book of Deuteronomy follows Moses in his final days, preaching to the new generation of Israelites who've just entered Canaan. Moses outlines the laws and guidance on how to live, and how Israel can be an example to all other nations of God's love. Moses, after walking around the desert for 40 years with these people, he knows that once he dies, the Israelites will fall into degeneracy and stray from the path of God, which is what he's describing in the wherever the Lord your God disperses you among the nations line means. God will send the Israelites into exile for disrespecting the land of Israel. This is what's commonly known as the Jewish diaspora. But only when God performs a grand action, circumcising the hearts of Jews, meaning to remove the bad or hardened layer, allowing for a more pure love, can the Jews return back to Israel and claim their holy land. I understand that I'm just an armchair historian with a B in my history A level, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I must have missed the prophesied arrival of the Lord above and the circumcising of the hearts of all Jews on earth, indicating them to reclaim the Holy Land. There's also the claim made by the Orthodox anti-Zionist group Net Yuri Carter surrounding the 3 oaths made in the Talmud, but I realize that I'm rambling on this point, so you can search it up if you're interested in listening to people more educated on the Torah than me speak about it. There is nowhere else for Jews to go. This is a claim made by many Israelis that if Palestine is freed, okay, maybe they wouldn't say freed, but if the state of Israel is dissolved into one state, Israelis would have nowhere to go. I believe that this comes from a misunderstanding of the Palestinian liberation movement and the aims of Hamas. In 2017, Hamas published an updated Documents of General Principles and Policies, which comprised 42 articles outlining the position of Hamas, their beliefs, and their end goal. Under the segment labeled The Zionist Project, Hamas explained their aims in relation to Israelis and Jews living in Israel. I will now read directly from Articles 16 and 17 of their manifesto. Hamas affirms that the conflict with the Zionist Project is not with the Jews because of their religion. Hamas does not wage a struggle against the Jews because they are Jewish, but wages struggle against the Zionists who occupy Palestine. Hamas rejects the persecution of any human being or the undermining of his or her rights on nationalist, religious, or sectarian grounds. Hamas is of the view that the Jewish problem, anti-Semitism, and the persecution of the Jews fundamentally linked to European history, and not the history of Arabs and the Muslims or to their heritage. The aim of the Palestinian liberation is not to expel Israelis out of the region, Not only would this be a huge undertaking for the newly formed Palestinian government, but a great stain upon their nation in the international sphere, something that Hamas repeatedly states is of high importance to them. It would also come directly into conflict with their own ideology. Hamas rejects the persecution of any human being or the undermining of his or her rights on nationalist, religious, or sectarian grounds. Palestinian liberationists want their land back to establish a Palestinian government for the Palestinian people consisting of Palestinian people, which under Palestinian rule, Israelis would be counted as civically, not ethnically. Taken from Article 28. The aim is to bolster the ranks of unity and joint action for the purpose of accomplishing national goals and fulfilling the aspirations of the Palestinian people. Looking at a similar situation in apartheid South Africa, using South African national census data, we can observe that after growing its peak white population in 1995, 1 year after apartheid had formally ended, the white South African population sat at 5.2 million. Since then, it's remained between 4.2 million and 4.6 million. While yes, there has been a decline that can most likely be attributed to white people not enjoying being classed as equal citizens, or the economic sanctions making business in South Africa unviable for white settlers. The mid-4 million mark has been stabilized for 2 decades, and since 2001 has begun to increase. The aim of Palestinian liberation isn't to expel Israelis, but to remove the oppressive state of Israel. Arabs already have the rest of the Middle East. Why can't Palestinians go there? Because there's already people there. Think of how dumb this argument sounds if you use it anywhere else. Why can't Germany have France? The French can just go to Spain or Portugal. Why can't Canada have the US? Americans can just go to Mexico. By making this argument, you treat Middle Eastern people as a hegemony, all thinking, acting, and living exactly the same, with the same values and the same ideas, and I don't even need to explain why this is unbelievably racist. But even if they were, and there were no cultural reasons why Palestinians couldn't just move into neighbouring countries, Israel won't let them. Since 2007, Israel and Egypt have turned Gaza into an open-air prison, blocking free travel for Palestinians on both borders. Israeli authorities also block Palestine from creating any form of air or seaport. There's no physical way Palestinians can leave Gaza, even if they wanted to. There was never a Palestinian state. This argument is mostly semantic, but yes, in the Western idea of a nation-state, there was no and has been no Palestinian state. But just because there was no formally recognized state does not mean that there weren't people living there. The concept of a nation-state is a relatively new idea, and also a very Western idea. There was no Celtic state, yet when the Romans arrived, people were living there. There was no Native American state, yet when the Wasps arrived, there were people living there. There was no Aboriginal state, but guess what? When the British arrived, there were people living there. Do you think Native Americans or Australian Aboriginal people deserve to be displaced and genocided because they didn't have what we in Europe would recognize as an official state? The world was not created with borders or with states, so it's unfathomably stupid to assume that every single tribe, region, and group of people will all unanimously come upon the same concept of statehood and put their name on the nation-state sign-up sheet. Just because it wasn't on maps with a big green tick saying, yes, this is a state, doesn't mean nobody was living there, nor does it mean that anyone else has the right to invade and colonize said land. The name Palestine dates back to the 12th century BCE, by Greek writers who named it Philistia. In the 2nd century CE, the name was revitalized by the Romans, who named it Syria Palestina. The mandate given to Britain after World War II, following the dissection of the Ottoman Empire, was called, guess what? The Mandate for Palestine. There is undeniable proof that this region is Palestine, that the people in the region are Palestinians. This has existed for centuries, and to claim it didn't because of a technicality is absurd. There's no genocide happening, this is war. To see how dumb this argument is, you just need to look at World War II and the actions of Nazi Germany. It explains itself. War is conflict between two nations or groups of armies. War is not indiscriminate bombing of civilians. I've seen people arguing that there can't be a genocide happening because the population of Palestine isn't decreasing, but as we'll talk about later, almost 50% of the Palestinian population is under 18, with the median age of around 19 and fertility rates ranging from 3.30 to 7.80, a staggering number compared to the world average of 2.2. This indicates that due to numerous reasons such as inadequate access to sexual health services, a lack of education over safe sex, or maybe a need to keep the population growing, the mass amount of children being born are offsetting the deaths caused by Israeli attacks. Taken from the abstract of The Demography of Genocide by Tadeusz Kugler, the demographic foundation of nations is remarkably resilient to losses, with the casualty of that resiliency not uniform cross-nationally. Countries in the early stages of development have very high birth rates, and a growing youthful population, with only the most extreme cases of genocide detrimentally affecting their long-term population. They are resilient due to the scale of potential population growth. Palestine turns down peace every time. Why shouldn't they? Why should Palestine negotiate on how much land they'll allow to be stolen from them, while the negotiations are being mediated with the strongest Western powers? It doesn't seem very fair. This argument also blames Palestinians, the subjects of genocide, for their own genocide for not taking up Israeli offers. From my research, and by research I'm looking on social media to see which one people talk about the most, the offer most brought up by Israel is the Clinton parameters, the supposed full control of the Gaza Strip and 90% of the West Bank. The same parameters that were described as designed to fail as they didn't meet the minimum requirements for any Palestinian leader by Robert Malley, one of the US negotiators. I'll respond to the Clinton parameters, but not to every single peace offering, since this is the one Zionists seem to be championing the hardest, and I'm trying to keep the video somewhat concise. Though Clinton proposes Palestinian control of around 90% of the West Bank, he believes that Israel should be compensated for the lost land via land swaps. This would entail even more displacing and movement of Palestinians off of their own land, and fails to acknowledge the right to the land of Palestinians by subjugating them to specific regions. Israel kept their demands vague by utilizing percentages instead of maps to describe what land they wanted. This worried many Palestinian authorities, as it would allow Israel to claim valuable land and Palestinian natural resources, whilst delegating Palestinians to unfertile and underdeveloped land. It's outlined that the IDF will still occupy Palestinian territories and be allowed to maintain 3 military bases, while the compromise found by Clinton for the Palestinian military is to have a fully non-militarized zone, meaning that Palestine can have no military presence. The parameters also adopted a wholesale reflection of Israeli policy, alleviating Israel's responsibility for the conflict and destruction created. If you want to read more about this, I highly recommend cross-comparing the Clinton parameters with the response paper written by the PLO, which will be linked in the sources. Hamas started the conflict. October 6th was not the beginning of the Israel-Palestine conflict. Again, conflict in heavy quotation marks. In fact, it dates back to before World War II. Dispute over the land between Jews and Arabs of modern times only came to a boiling point following the mass immigration of European Jews. The harsh militant groups deployed by the British and the Zionists, like the aptly named Jewish Settlement Police, or the Jewish Colonial Trust, sought to crush any protest, riot, or revolt from Palestinian liberationists, which served to heighten the conflict to a much bloodier ordeal. I would recommend watching AJ Plus's video titled How Israel Was Created to learn more about the militancy of Zionism, and how if you, like the British, ignore citizens and continuously rule against their wishes, it should come as no surprise to you when said citizens rise against you. But what a childish argument they started it is, to think that this is a solid base to justify the murder of over 17,000 men, women and children is beyond inhumane. Palestinians deserve it for voting in terrorists. In the 2006 legislative elections, Hamas was voted in. However, this was only by a 44% minority. This means that out of 1,350,655 voters, only around 594,000 voted for Hamas. The estimated 5,003,000 citizens living in Palestine are being blamed for the voting habits of roughly 10.7% of their population, And that's assuming that the voters haven't been killed by Israeli bombings or poor living conditions. According to the Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics, 44% of Palestinians are under 18, meaning that they wouldn't have been alive for the 2006 election. To justify the bombing of Palestine due to 10% of the population's voting habits would be collective punishment, which is a war crime according to Article 33 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. But with all that said, the argument also brings up the ethical problem. Can you justify bombing a country, including civilians, due to their voting behavior? Let me present you with a hypothetical. A country votes in a new leader, we'll call him Leader X, by 50%. More than Palestine voted for Hamas, but easier for the hypothetical. Leader X, while in their position of power, bombs other countries around 600 different times. By definition, this is terrorism, the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians in the pursuit of political aims. These bombings killed around 8,000 people. Would you, as a foreign leader, see it justifiable to bomb the civilians of country X because of the actions of Leader X? If you say no, then swap the name of country X to Palestine and Leader X to Hamas, and I've proved my point correctly. But if you're still unconvinced and say yes, then you might want to get your pilot's license ready, because the hypothetical Leader X is former US President Barack Obama. The hypothetical bombings and killings were his drone strikes across Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, and Afghanistan. Hamas is ISIS. This argument is mainly emotive, trying to fearmonger people into condemning Hamas or even supporting Israel. ISIS is an Islamic fundamentalist group whose main goal is to conquer the entire world and then implement a theocratic leadership and Sharia law. Compare those goals with the Hamas manifesto I read from earlier. Article 28 states Hamas believes in and adheres to managing its Palestinian relations on the basis of pluralism, democracy, national partnership, acceptance of others, and adoption of dialogue. Article 30 states Hamas stresses the necessity of building Palestinian national institutions on sound democratic principles. Foremost among them are free and fair elections. Article 33. Palestinian society is enriched by its prominent personalities, figures, dignitaries, civil society institutions, and youth students, trade unionists, and women's group who work together for the achievement of national goals and societal building, pursue the resistance and achieve liberation. Clearly, the goals of Hamas and ISIS are light years apart, and the only shared similarity between them is they both believe in Islam and have guns, another argument that can be boiled down to blatant racism and misinformation. Palestine is anti-LGBTQ. Yes, the consensus of Palestinian Authority is that homosexuality between two men is wrong for two main reasons. One, the national religion of Palestine is Islam, outlined in Article 4 of the 2002 proposed Constitution of Palestine. While I'm very aware that there are Muslim LGBTQ activists, and their identities and work should not be muddied or overlooked, I recommend looking at the Queer Muslim Project. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Islam, more specifically Islam in the Middle East, has had the best track with LGBTQ rights. And two, because much of current Palestinian law still holds its colonial roots. For example, the 1936 British Mandate Criminal Code enforced on Palestine, part of the Palestinian Mandate, Section 152, 1b and c, both outline laws against committing sodomy. However, this argument brings up the much greater ethical debate. Just because these people don't hold the same social values. Keep in mind, social values that we in Western society have only somewhat come around to supporting in the past 20 years. Does this give us the right to indiscriminately bomb and starve said people? I mean, let's just take a quick look at how much of a bastion Israel is for gay rights. Though there are no laws prohibiting same-sex sex, gay marriage is still not legalized, with only one municipality recognizing same-sex couples as having the same rights as straight couples. Oh, and it only took them until 2020 to introduce these new laws. Sorry, I misspoke. No legal changes have actually been brought in. The mayor just said that they would, and as far as my research has shown, has never followed up on these claims. In a study conducted by the Pew Research Center, it was reported that 43% of Israelis strongly oppose same-sex marriage. 13% somewhat opposed same-sex marriage, and only 16% were strongly in favour. This is awful. I unequivocally support gay rights and the LGBTQ movement, and I hold a deep sorrow for all those, both Israeli and Palestinians, who are disadvantaged and affected by these laws. I'm not looking to dunk on queer Israelis with this statement. I just want to point out the inherent contradiction in this argument and the double standard people are holding Palestine to. If you genuinely care about LGBTQ people worldwide, then you should stand up for what's right, and I hold high respect for you if you do that. But if you were to fight for the rights of queer Palestinians, said Palestinians must be alive for you to take that fight. With Israeli occupation and genocide being the most pressing issue towards the people of Palestine, you must first alleviate the colonial rule before then shaping society. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Physiological and safety needs must be met before belonging, esteem, and self-actualization can be achieved. And with that said, we've reached the end of the video. I don't want to give some big preachy speech about how all of this makes me feel upset or how awful it all is. I think we all understand the severity of the situation at hand. Please consider sharing this video and spreading the message about the state of Israel's atrocities and genocidal regime. I put links in the description of the videos to sites where you can donate to Palestine, if you're in a position where you can give money. Even a small donation could mean a world of difference to the people of Palestine. I would say that I'd donate the money made off of this video to one of the charities, but with the size of my channel, I'm not sure if I'd get enough views and revenue to hit the threshold for YouTube to actually give me my money. So I've preemptively donated out of my own pocket, so I don't come off as if I'm, trying to make a quick buck off of this topic. This video was created to inform, not to profit. Please do not give in when faced with such an existential, monolithic challenge such as this, and keep on fighting the good fight, spreading awareness and combating Israeli misinformation. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. I have been Unajoy, and you have been informed.